So the age of disclosure just dropped. Uh, I'm sure many people have seen it by now. I got to go to the New York City premiere, which was awesome, and yeah, it's streaming on Amazon. Ryan, what was your initial, let's say your initial reaction? Because I know you did some videos to the age of disclosure documentary.
The quality was incredibly high, cinematography, B-roll, and then having 34 officials from government, military, and intelligence community is pretty extraordinary. They all agreed to go on a be part of a documentary that basically says UFOs are real. So just by agreeing to be in that documentary, they're like kind of signing off to that perspective. And it just really covered all the bases that I think the American public and the public at large should be aware of, from the alleged sub rosa Cold War to how the technology could improve society, to nuclear incursions and what that might mean and suggest about a relationship with the phenomenon. And it went deep into the cover up. And one thing I will say, I don't think this movie was a psyop, and I'll tell you why, because it didn't come off as cheerleading the United States government. It didn't come off as damage control for the United States government either. And there was barely any threat narrative that I could perceive. It was mostly just laying out what's going on behind the scenes that the world is not aware of because it's all behind closed doors. That was my perception of it. And I do think it will change the landscape of this topic. Maybe not immediately, but I think it's another domino for sure.
Yeah, you have a lot of like really high level government people not only stating UFOs are real, but there's non-human intelligences, non-human entities. I mean, they go as far as to talk about the structure of the secrecy, right? Yeah, they were talking about the legacy program and like, the CIA is basically tasked with organizing it. And so they went into some things that were a little surprising. But I know to play devil's advocate a little, people have said, well, there is a planned disclosure, and we're going to get into the controlled disclosure and the catastrophic disclosure conversation as well. But for here in the age of disclosure, I know there will be people that will say that the plan from the beginning has been a limited disclosure because at least some people within factions that have knowledge of the UFO reality want the controlled disclosure aspect, and part of that includes introducing some technologies and with that the technology transfer. So that's why that's one psyop aspect as well. That they want to disclose just enough to get these technologies out and have some technology deals and all that stuff. But yeah, it's to think that you can limit disclosures. That's a I don't know if that's possible, right? I mean, they've done a good job covering up the whole subject for decades, so who knows? But again, the documentary itself, I think if you put that in front of anybody, they'll say, yeah, there's got to be something to UFOs. And I'm curious as to how, like, the greater public outside of the UFO community bubble is it going to actually reach and open their minds?
Yeah. I mean, it's been covered in news media like crazy. I think it's been covered more than anything that's happened since David Grush coming out. ABC, CNN, Fox News, the New York Times. So it's already made and it's already influenced society, I would argue, just by the news coverage alone. Yeah, and I was really surprised, just reiterating what you were stating about the main players. They called out the CIA, the U.S. Air Force, the Department of Energy, and the defense contractors. Those are the main players in the cover up. And yes, I was very, very surprised that they went there. Not exactly a limited hangout, in my opinion. basically telling you an important part of the architecture of the secrecy. And that was really surprising to me. And of course, you have David Grush was recently on the Brett Baer, a special report with Brett Baer. And then also Dan Farrer, the director of the film, was on the Joe Rogan Experience. And both of them were saying that the Trump administration is talking behind the scenes on how they're going to respond to this film. And if that's true, then that would, I guess, factor into the idea of a controlled disclosure. I think that that there are people inside the government that kind of initiate this film? No, I think it was an entrepreneurial project done by Dan Farah and company, but the government might use it to help bring out a controlled disclosure. And um, I'm bullish that we will get disclosure before the end of the Trump presidency. Obviously, that's might be wishful thinking or biased thinking on my part, so I'm not making a strict prediction. But it's like at some point you have to hit critical mass, and like let's not forget that the sitting Secretary of State and the advisor to the National Security Council, or the advisor to the president within the National Security Council, Marco Rubio was one of the main people in the film. How can he be in this film, Secretary of State and the National Security Advisor to the President of the United States, and no subsequent questions come from the media? Subsequent questions have to come from the media, and the Trump administration is going to have to answer to it. Because if journalists just kind of ignore this film, even though the literal Secretary of State sitting Marco Rubio was in it, then I'll just believe that we're living in the Twilight Zone, because that would make no sense.
It's and I saw you when you asked that on Twitter. You posed the question on Twitter, and I'm like, how is that possible, right? Like like 20, 30 years ago, that probably would have been disclosure. And we're in such an atmosphere that it's like what else is it really going to take, right? You have somebody of that level stating that this is all real, and there's no there's no follow up on it, right? So that is amazing in a not good sense.
Yeah, it's almost like we've reached a stage now where like we've gotten so advanced in disclosure that nothing works anymore. It's
Yeah.
like it loses its power. It's like, and it's weird. I can't explain it.
I mean that's like, I guess, the stigma, right? The stigma at work. But I think people are so numb, and I don't know if it's to UFO information in general, or just people's attention span, or people's ability to care about about anything that they don't think affects them in any way.
I suspect that I really suspect this. I'm not certain about it, but I suspect there is a internal inertia to disclosure in everybody, even me, even me, even experiencers, even if they believe with all their heart that they want disclosure. I really think there's an inborn inertia, because there's some part of our psyche that knows that the world will change so dramatically after disclosure. I think there's a psychological fear there that everybody has, whether they're aware of it or not. It's almost like a sixth sense. They know that, like, accepting that we're not alone, and there's other species in our biosphere that are more advanced than us, that can do whatever they want whenever they want. I almost feel like there's a part of all of us that just doesn't want to accept that, and maybe that's part of the inertia, and part of why someone like Marco Rubio can say what he says in that film, and it doesn't necessarily have the splash that you might anticipate.
Yeah, and they went into a little bit of that in the Age of Disclosure, where I think Hal Puthoff was talking about the study they did, and they came out with the answer that basically it was not a good idea to disclose at that time. And I think more people feel like, even though back then it wasn't, that now it is. I mean, that's just how it seems. I think the longer that it's kept hidden, the worse the outcome is going to be. I mean, you only have to explain yourself more why it was kept hidden, and then again, I think we've both discussed this before. Is I think what's really going to shock people the most is not that aliens are real, right? And they're visiting us, I think people are going to be most alarmed that this was hidden from them, that their institutions had lied to them intentionally for decades and succeeded.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think part of it is people are going to be shocked like that they were capable of lying about it. Like, how does that even work? Like mathematically, like like just logistically, how does that work? Like, just as an example, and this is from the film. They covered a few things that I was not aware of. I'm sure other people might have been, but I wasn't. They covered I think it was Dr. Eric Davis talked about. He read an intelligence report where there was a 1989 in 1989 there was a tic tac shaped UAP twice the size of the USS Nimitz carrier strike group tic tac that was witnessed in 2004 that crashed in Russia. Russia recovered it. They recovered 4 humanoid bodies, and this was the box office part of it. They discovered a directed energy weapon inside this tic tac, and of course, saying that, of course, there's going to be some people in the UFO community that are going to go straight to, yeah, that's fabricated. That's not true. They're just trying to create a threat narrative, and that's the danger of this idea that that anything negative about the phenomenon must be fabricated, is because that is a psyop. That is a psyop coming from the UFO community, I would argue. Because if you're so certain that there can't be anything like that, then even if there is, you're just going to say it's not true. What do you think, James, about like what are the implications of that being true, that they did find a directed energy weapon inside that tic tac that was allegedly recovered in 1989 in Russia?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at slide 9, it gets into a lot of the strange sciences involved, or capabilities that are involved with UAP. I remember George Knapp has talked about, speaking to Russian scientists, and they said in effect, that if they had that laser weapon or directed energy weapon mastered, they'd kick our ass basically. But and then, okay, so there's different countries that are recovering these craft, and in this alleged Cold War to reverse engineer this technology, which I wouldn't doubt sounds very human. I mean, I think that there's probably a lot of technologies that are derived from UAP. So the directed, I mean, I don't know about that one particular claim per se, but the idea that a directed energy weapon would be reverse engineered from a UFO, I mean, like, why not?
Yeah, or the fact that the UFO had a directed energy weapon. Like, what is it there for? And that makes me think about statements made by David Grush, but I think Dr. Eric Davis has maybe said the same thing, and Gary Nolan. Yeah, maybe they all have the same source, but regardless, there's implications that all the different species don't necessarily get along with each other, which really complicates disclosure. Like I think disclosure is so much more profound and complicated than most people consider. At some point, I'll have to brainstorm an article on that and do the best I can to materialize that. But like, just the fact that there might be species on our planet that are exponentially more advanced than us, and they don't even necessarily like each other. Like, where do you even go with that when the public finally learns that in the event that is true?
Well, and I think you've also mentioned this before, and if that is the case, which is entirely possible, why have those different intelligences decided unilaterally not to disclose themselves? Which is another, mind-boggling question, is, why wouldn't one of them at least try to intervene and directly disclose and say, hey, look out for these other guys, or whatever they would say. They've all kept a code of silence, right, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's that's one of the most fascinating mysteries. It might be that they all see it as a disadvantage, like they all individually see it as a disadvantage. So instead of it being like they're all in coercion with each other and agree not to do it, they just all see it as a disadvantage for humanity to know um, scientifically and without debate that their presence is here. I take a kind of a spiritual take on it. It's speculative, but I kind of think there's some kind of like maybe even like governor that maybe like stops them from fully disclosing to the public until humanity is supposed to. I know that sounds really new age and spiritually oriented, but I do wonder about that only because once disclosure happens, it's like a new enlightenment. It would be such a huge developmental stage, and maybe like if you look at it from like a reincarnation standpoint, and you look at the human soul as coming to Earth to grow and to learn, we're not going to grow and learn in the same way after disclosure than we did before. We're just not. For a variety of reasons. I could lay them down right now. One is medicine might start getting much better real quickly. Maybe because these entities will share what they know about medicine, and disease will become something that is not as prominent in our world. Longevity might increase. The quality of life would increase, right? Poverty and lack of transportation, like the quality of life might increase dramatically once there's that disclosure and that there's open contact. And maybe like part of the human journey or the human soul journey is to keep coming into this world for eons, essentially, learning lessons that can only be learned when life is harder. So if we were to have disclosure too soon, it would completely like uh, take the whole like point of our souls coming into this reality off track. So this is just my pet hypothesis. I call it alien AI hypothesis. And I wonder more so than I'm convinced whether there's something deeper to why they have not revealed themselves so publicly. Something about humanity having to go through certain phases. And maybe they understand that. And maybe they weirdly respect that, even if they don't even get along with each other.
And then there's the idea like if they did introduce themselves immaturely, they could disrupt our society potentially, and or to play the devil's advocate, they could if the whole Loosh farm thing, right? I know Joe Merger will love that. Um, if they're doing some kind of psychic energy extraction somehow, that wouldn't help them if their presence being known. So
Yeah.
yeah, there's all sides to that. It's just and then right before we recorded, we were talking about the idea of, well, basically what's going to happen once our awareness of them is solidified collectively, right? Like once there is a disclosure, does that mean people are going to see UFOs more frequently? Does that mean that the non-human intelligence are going to openly communicate with us? What dynamics are going to change once there is a disclosure?
Yeah. I mean, we might interact with him more on based on 2 points. One point might be there might be some kind of contract, if you will, for maybe lack of a better way of putting it. Although I think you, James, would probably say we've had contact with them a long time ago, and then that ceased, maybe like older civilizations. But even if that's true, there could still be a contract that's a part of that equation. Um, like certain times of human evolution is right for us to interact with our neighbors, if you want to call them that, our neighbors, and certain times it's better for us not to interact with them. So our interaction with the phenomenon might increase as a result of two instigators. One is the contract might be over, that contract that it's not right for humanity to interact too prematurely. So that might be over, which is why you get disclosure. And then another component could simply be that, and we were talking about this before we were started to record, is that when you have encounters, it opens your aperture, and it facilitates you being able to interact more with the phenomenon, which might be why people who have experiences with these phenomena early in life tend to have more of them, and people that don't tend to have less or none. And then I was watching Cosmosis episode recently when they had the Irva episode, and J. Christopher King said something really interesting, really interesting, fascinating. He said that there's one exception to this. There's one exception. I don't know if he said it that emphatically, but maybe there's more nuance. But by more or less, there's one exception to the scenario where if you haven't experienced anomalous experiences when you're young, you're much less likely later in life. He said people who start meditating later in life, that's the exception. He's heard from many meditators that if you started meditating later in life, you begin to have anomalous experiences. And I'm a meditator. I haven't done it in a while, but I started meditating when I was I think I was either 18 or 19 years old, really young. And that the thing about meditation is like you have anomalous experiences all the time. Just feeling energies in your body that may not be anomalous, like seeing orbs, but it's still like a completely different human experience that you probably will never have outside of meditation. And I have had like one of my most profound, and I haven't had many anomalous experiences that are like box office when I meditated, but one of the most profound ones that I did have that I would consider box office is I was meditating, and then I saw like this portal coming toward me. Like it wasn't like so unambiguous. It was more like I sensed it, and maybe there was some kind of visual to it, but it was like not as clear as like you would see in a movie maybe, but I could sense it. And it was coming toward me and I was coming towards it. And it was like we linked up and I received a telepathic message when we linked up. And I never forget. It was one message, very, very quick. It said this exact thing. When you go through life relaxed. What the fuck?
Yeah.
That's the message I received. What is that? Who's talking to me? But no, it gets more interesting. It was more interesting than that. It was fascinating. It wasn't just that I received that message. It felt like I was tapping into like pure wisdom or pure truth. There was like a purity to what I was receiving. Like it was coming from some realm of like objectivity or truth or wisdom. So it wasn't just that I was receiving the telepathic message. I was also that I was perceiving like some kind of like almost like holy purity. Holy is not the right word, but just some weird purity to it, or like information field reality to it. But I don't know what it means. I don't know what it was, but that's an example of like people who start meditating. Yeah, if you meditate every day, you will probably sooner or later have an anomalous experience, even if you never had one before.
Yeah, and actually, to speak to that, one perspective on that, which I know I'll say the word and it's going to sound new agey, but you tap into your aspect of higher self or something, right? And again, that's just a word, it's a concept. We can just say that you're tapping into a higher information field that you're in tune with somehow, right? But in regards to the anomalous experiences, one way for sure, I've personally seen many people have not, they've maybe meditated before and maybe they've had like a lucid dream or two, but they've had no UFO encounters, started doing CE5 and had actual UFO experiences after CE5. So that's another kind of slant on the idea of people practicing meditation, but maybe to the next level is where you're not just practicing meditation, but you're intending for a UFO encounter. And I think even in the Age of Disclosure movie, I think it was Jay Stratton who said something like, with people who started investigating the phenomenon, started having the interactions, the anomalous interactions with it, right? And I think, part of it is the opening of your aperture. And I think another part of it could be, people call it the hitchhiker effect. Jacques Vallée had called it post-contact effects, but there's some kind of entanglement that occurs, right, with the UFO phenomenon. And I know that's kind of vague and broad, but I think if your attention is there more often, you're more likely to have some kind of interaction.
Yeah, and like I was telling you before we started recording, it's not the most impressive story, but I did 2 episodes on near-death experiences on my channel. I don't know, remember it was after the first or the second, but like after one of those episodes, after was done filming it, I think after uploading it, it was really late, so I went to go to sleep, and I just felt a presence. Like the presence was so powerful and so overt that I was obnoxious. Like I felt something so palpable and I wasn't willing to, it didn't matter how tired I was until that thing left, until I like felt that thing left. That's when I started, okay, we can go to sleep now. Cause I wasn't gonna go to sleep feeling that. It was honestly, it was kind of scary. Um, and I've never felt a presence like that before or after. Once in a blue moon, I'll feel faint. Like I'll feel like a faint. Is there something behind me? But like, I don't know if that's just my mind. But with this experience, like it was so over the top, and it makes me wonder. It makes me wonder if something was like, winking at me, like, "Oh, you just did a video about near-death experiences. Well, let me give you a little visit so that you know that you might be onto something." Yeah, something like that could happen in a post-disclosure world on a collective basis, and wouldn't necessarily completely surprise me. And maybe that's why the Collins elite is. Maybe they have a point, as you were telling me earlier, regarding not wanting disclosure, because it could change. It could change humanity's relationship with deeper realities.
Yeah, and that idea is, the Colin elite has the a train of thought that if you were to disclose the UFO reality to the public, you're now inviting them into our reality. And there's the counter argument to that is, well, they're already here. They're already interacting with people directly, whether it be through a CE5, through an abduction experience, through a psychic experience, the visiting of the nuclear sites, the interactions with pilots, all of these different categories of contact that occur and have been occurring for decades. I don't think disclosure is standing in their way of doing whatever they would want to do anyways. All right.
Yeah, and I just had a thought just enter my head. Galileo, I'm not that conversant in this story, but as it goes, um, he kind of went against the Catholic Church, what the Catholic Church wanted to promote, which is that the sun revolves around the earth and not the other way around. And I was just thinking, like, maybe that's a big lesson in the post-disclosure world, is that the hierarchy that we've created with humans, maybe it's just a bunch of bullshit. Because, just as an example, like our Abrahamic faiths, just as an example, and maybe even some, and frankly, maybe even some of the Eastern faiths might um, promote this to some lesser extent. It could be argued, but I'm not a theological scholar or anything. But it's just kind of implied, like humans are the most important. We are God's best creation. We are, God makes covenants with humanity. Humans are the reason the universe was created. Human. And maybe one of the lessons of a post-disclosure world, it's like another Galileo moment. We realize that there are other intelligences all around us, and the divine treasures them and values them and has just as close a relationship with them as the divine has with us. And that also would be a difficult pill to swallow, because it kind of diverts from the way that many religions on our planet explain reality.
Yeah, or what if some of them have a closer intellectual understanding of what we think God is? And then
Absolutely. Absolutely.
and
I mean,
all
and
the
and 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 that would make sense, actually. I'm going to go ahead and say that. That would actually make sense. Of course, people from fundamental religions might be like, well, if they present that, therefore they are of the devil, because anything that contradicts their assumptions about reality must by definition be from the devil, because their fundamental framework has to be true. And of course, that's pre-disclosure world energy, as far as I'm concerned. That is not post-disclosure world
yeah.
energy, and that is not going to survive in a post-disclosure world. But yeah, it would make sense. I'm not saying it's guaranteed, but it would make sense that entities that don't even talk through their lips anymore, right? They don't even talk through their lips anymore. Everything is telepathic. Like they are by definition closer to the divine. We are by definition more separate from the divine, because we are not as evolved, and there's more of a barrier, a psychic spiritual barrier between deeper realities or the divine. And with some of these entities, that barrier might have kind of narrowed or gotten smaller.
Well,
So it is feasible that their understanding of the divine in some ways may be more accurate than ours.
and there's actually like an alternate theory to that in some ways, saying, some of these intelligences, maybe even the ones that are seeding this technology to humanity potentially and wanting us to evolve in a certain technological way, lost their connection to source because they went completely post-biological, and it's actually our biology that connects us to source and the divine. And some intelligences want us to evolve in a way where we're in line with their hive mind post-biological way of living, and other intelligences don't want us to over technologize, like what they said in the Ariel school incident, where they're saying we're getting too obsessed with technology, basically, and that we therefore risk losing our humanity to technology, and not that post biological can't be creative in any sense, but our ability to tune into source and the divine and creativity and inspiration, all that is actually due to our biology and our connection to the natural universe. So there's all these different theories. I mean, we're not going to know until post disclosure, maybe even, right? But that's just another interesting kind of like side tangent thought in regards to, in which way are we going to evolve? And are there non-human intelligences that went completely post-biological, where they don't even reproduce anymore naturally? And there's that theory too that some of these UFOs or non or human intelligences are extra tempestrials, right? And they're coming back in time to try to steer us on the right track. I know that's completely highly speculative, but I don't see why that couldn't be an option on the table, right? So there's all these different theories in regards to the course of our evolution and the importance of disclosure in that realm.
Wow, that's fascinating. I don't think I've ever heard that before. That's really getting into I don't know I can't think of the word, but it's really getting into like making disclosure much bigger than maybe I imagined. Yeah, that's fascinating. I mean, the universe might be chaotic that way, right? It might be chaotic that way where like all these different beings are so fascinated in our development, and maybe like you said, some of them want us to go into that hive mind trajectory, and others want us to become more spiritually and conscious based and feeling based. And yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, and just imagine one thing I don't think a lot of people think about regarding open contact, which I think is like you cannot separate open contact from disclosure.
Right.
They are completely intertwined. Um, One thing I think is so fascinating is if we start having conversations with non-human intelligences, like I mean, it's kind of scary. Like our science is just gonna, like, if they share what they know about the universe, well, we're going to become like such a different civilization so quickly. Are they going to give us their AI capabilities? Are they going to give us their medicine? Are they going to teach us how these propulsion systems work? Um, so it's like, it's just bizarre when you think about it.
Yeah, and again, as somebody who's had contact and which I believe was positive or beneficial, right? I mean, it seemed positive to me. Doesn't mean it necessarily was. Doesn't mean there's no nefarious reasoning behind it. I really have no idea, to be completely honest. But I mean, how are we even supposed to take anything at face value? I mean, that's why we really need disclosure, right? And it's like there's the whole conversation around is disclosure a psyop? Um, and you had that post. I'll read it off, actually, a little bit of it. You posted on Twitter. Oh, it's gone. I had it, and it's like the if the Vatican discloses psyop, if the government, if insiders disclose, it's a psyop. If the phenomenon disclosed, it's a psyop. I mean, in any of those scenarios, we do need some kind of disclosures to even move forward on this.
Yeah, I think people are too heavy-handed with the psyop talk. I don't think it's as treacherous as they make it out to be. That's just my opinion, and I know that I'm probably the most annoying person in the world when it comes to emphasizing how important disclosure is. I talk about it a lot, but part of the reason I do is because there is a minority thread within ufology where people either dismiss disclosure, they say disclosure has already happened, or they say we don't need disclosure, we can do it ourselves. And I'm just thinking to myself, none of those make sense at all. But I mean, because all disclosure is removing the debate about whether the phenomenon is here or not. That's all disclosure is. And if someone who says we can do it ourselves can do that, man, more power to you. You will be my hero, right? I don't have an ideological need for the government to do it. I just think that it's right now, it seems most likely that that's where it's going to come from, but it could come from the phenomenon. It could come from scientific investigation. Yeah, getting to what you were saying about psyops. Yeah, the thing about it is everybody has self-interest. Let's say James Fox somehow came across smoking gun evidence and he ended the debate by bringing smoking gun evidence into the public arena. People would say, who gave it to them? Who funded his ability to get it in the first place? Why was he chosen and nobody else? And even if he were to present the evidence in a neutral way, people would still scream psyop because they would say, okay, but now he has such a bigger platform. People are going to go look at his older interviews, his older documentaries, and those older interviews and documentaries are going to have so much more influence on the world than they otherwise would. And I think that's one of the problems of disclosure. Whoever discloses is going to have way too much influence, way too much legacy. They're going to have way too much sway on how we perceive the topic. So maybe the phenomenon really needs to do I can't think of his name. The guy that teamed up with Tom DeLonge to write the book. What is his name?
Peter Levenda?
Yeah, Peter Levenda.
Oh,
Peter,
right. Yeah.
He made a tweet not too long ago. I'm going to do a video on that at some point.
Yeah, it's a great one. Yeah.
Where I don't have it in front of me, but he basically said that you're thinking about disclosure all wrong. Think of disclosure this way. Everyone wakes up one morning and everyone has the same dream, and it's about non-human intelligence. Well, that would be that's the only way that I can see that maybe there'd be less complaints about a psyop. But even then, people would be like, "There's still a psyop. The phenomenon psyoping us." I mean, if the Vatican discloses, people will say that they're steering the information toward their religious theology. If the U.S. government discloses, if they talk about abductions, right? People will say it's a psyop because they'll say, "No, Stephen Greer says there's no abductions. It's all my labs." If they don't talk about abductions, people will say, oh, it's a psyop because they don't want to introduce abductions into the conversation. So by withholding that, it's a psychological operation. So it really doesn't matter who discloses. If UFOs and God, the author of that, Bledsoe, if Bledsoe discloses, people are going to say it's a psyop. He is furthering his religious beliefs and wants to influence people based upon the platform he will get as a result of bringing smoking gun evidence to the world. He's trying to influence people to believe that his perspective on reality and spirituality and the phenomenon is true. PSYOP. It doesn't matter where disclosure comes from. There is going to be screams of PSYOP no matter what. And to me, this completely misses the plot, because it's not about how perfectly reliable the source of disclosure is. It's about the conversation that happens after disclosure. The PSYOP is happening now. I don't understand why people are focusing on disinformation agents and the U.S. government leading people astray. No. The PSYOP is happening now. The biggest PSYOP is the cover-up. Everything else that you bring to the table about a PSYOP, it's like a grain of sand versus all the beaches in all the universe. We're literally... There was a line in The Age of Disclosure from Lou Elizondo. He said that, not that him saying it makes it true, but it was theatrical, so I'm going to use him to open up with this quote. He said that 99.999% of scientists think there's nothing to the UFO issue. Do I think that's hyperbolic? Yes, I don't think it's quite 99%. I think it's probably like 90%, maybe 95%, maybe 98%. And then there's various degrees of confidence on whether something's really going on. But like, that's the PSYOP. That is the PSYOP. After disclosure, we can debate what is true. We don't have to take anybody's word for it. The government says X. We can say, I don't know about that. Governments can debate amongst themselves. Russia can debate the United States. China can debate the United States. Brazil can debate France. Scientists can debate each other. Ufologists can debate each other. Like, we do not have a conversation right now. We have a cover-up. We are living under a cover-up. So if people wonder why, like, I get so kind of peeved, is not a great word. If people wonder why I get so peeved when they're always focusing on like disinformation agents and we can't accept disclosure from the United States government, it's like you're living under a psychological operation that's been going on for 80 years where everyone is in the dark about this. Why do we debate whether the phenomenon is real? Because we don't have smoking gun evidence. Why does all our institutions, literally all of them, science, history, philosophy, our universities, there's no money going into studying UFOs. Is that not, that's batshit crazy. That's the cover up. That's the psyop. That's the psyop that is hurting humanity. If the United States government or the Russian government or the Chinese government or a scientist or a ufologist brings disclosure, I can live with some of the information being false or biased or wrong. What I cannot live with is the cover up.
Yeah, and I think again, no matter who discloses, it's going to be biased. There's no pure disclosure. And I mean, I get the people who are wary of a controlled disclosure, but there's there's no way that, let's just say, the US government, right? If they decide to disclose, that they're going to be like, okay, guys, let's let all hell raise loose. Fuck it, right? Excuse me. Like they're going to do it in a way that protects the institution because that's their job, right? And
our job is to challenge them.
correct.
That's
So
why that's why, that's why I think getting so fixated on psyops is you're totally missing the point. Only after disclosure is there conversation. Pre-disclosure world, there's no conversation. We are all under the spell of the ultimate psyop. Stop getting so fixated on an imperfect disclosure. It's mind-boggling.
yeah, and again, there is no right answer, right? Like
No, there's no right answer. I will be the first to admit this is my biased take, and I appreciate counter arguments to what I have to say, but I'm just arguing it from my standpoint.
because if we have Dr. Stephen Greer's disclosure, it's incomplete. If you have Christopher Bledsoe's disclosure, that's incomplete.
And that's
Right?
the thing. Disclosure is about 8 billion people engaging the phenomenon. That's disclosure. That's disclosure. Disclosure is not the U.S. admitting that we're not alone. Disclosure is not Chris Bledsoe finding smoking gun evidence and bringing it to the world and it getting verified by scientists. Disclosure is not some documentary showing a crash retrieval and it being vetted and being real. No, that's not disclosure. Disclosure is what happens after the smoking gun evidence emerges. It's the conversation. It's 8 billion of us taking it on. That's disclosure, and that's why I just do not feel this. I feel like that's why I feel like there's an overemphasis on disinformation, because disinformation at its most powerful is the cover up.
Yeah, I think what the emphasis on the disinformation is, I think it's well intended in general. I can't answer because there's people that will interject the disinformation aspect for ulterior motives, right? Other than the well-being of their fellow humans. Let me just put it that way. But I think some people will emphasize it because they don't want what's being said publicly by insiders or anybody to be taken at face value. Because I think that.
But here's the problem. Here's the problem, James. If they do that, they have to specify what it is that the insiders are saying that's problematic, because otherwise you're basically giving the impression of nuance but ending with the payload. What's the payload? Don't trust those whistleblowers. They're up to no good. It's not fair. It's not fair argumentation. If I said, hey, you know that James Iandoli guy, sketchy as all hell. Someone says, oh really? What do you mean? It's complicated. It's nuanced. Just don't trust him. He's sketchy as all hell. How is that fair? How is that measured? It's false. It's fraudulent nuance. It's setting yourself up like you're measured and you're responsible, but then dropping the payload at the end, which relays that you should not trust them. I mean,
yeah,
what has Jeffrey Nusatelli said that I should be so scared about? What has Dylan Borland said that I should be so scared about? what has David Grush said that I should be so scared about? Maybe I should, right? Maybe I'm naive, and I am not denying that as a potentiality, but you got to tell me what I should be scared about. You can't just
Well,
say he's a disinformation agent and then be like, oh, okay, that just discredits him and I just should not listen to anything he says.
so I think that's part of what the issue is that there'll be some information, let's just say they have point one, point two, point three, and maybe two out of those 3 points end up being incorrect in some regard. And they say, well, see, that wasn't completely correct. So therefore, we can't trust anything they're saying. And because therefore, if they're not telling the truth or giving us facts, their information is not valid or they may have an ulterior motive.
And now let's not forget that whistleblowers are victims of the cover up too. If they
Correct.
say something that's inaccurate, it may not be intentional. Like this is a really complicated situation. And look, I'm not trying to say that, whistleblowers necessarily have no connection to the national security apparatus. I don't know. I'm not asserting one way or the other. But all I'm saying that is if you're going to say that they're up to no good, then tell me what they're saying that's up to no good. Don't just tell me they're up to no good because I just don't think that's fair. I don't think you should treat your average Joe that way, and I don't think you should treat whistleblowers that way. And I think we should give whistleblowers the same kind of decorum that we would give anybody else. And also another point I want to make is that we're all disinformation agents. We're all PSYOP operators because all of us, you, me, Stephen Greer, Lou Elizondo, everyone is shaping the narrative, shaping perception about UFOs because we all share our opinions. We all choose to focus on some things while ignoring other things, which also shapes the narrative, right? So it's like everybody, as far as I'm concerned, is part of a PSYOP. Now, the counter to that is, of course, well, yeah, but you're not doing it on purpose, and that the whistleblowers are, assuming that's even correct. But I would say, okay, maybe you're right, but the end result is no different, is it? If I'm influential and I'm leading to people to perceive the phenomenon in ways that are in concert with my bias, then it doesn't matter if it's intentional or not. The outcome is exactly the same.
I think that the argument for that is that there is an intention behind it, and let's just say disinformation part one, two, and three are all geared to shape people's perspective in a certain way that will ultimately lead to a certain outcome. The old problem, reaction, solution equation to it. And I think that again, on one side, people are saying, well, this whole disclosure thing, starting with let's just say TTSA, uh, and everything that has come out of that is all their goal from the beginning was some kind of technology transfer and it's going to benefit.
Yeah, that was weird. I would be the first one to say that was really weird, and people should be suspicious about that. Go have at it. Like people think I'm one-dimensional in my thinking because I'm so pro-disclosure. No, I'm not. You know what else I'm skeptical about? The whole 2027 thing. I don't believe it. I don't believe any of it whatsoever regarding something's coming towards us and it will reach us by 2027. And maybe I'm wrong, but I am utterly skeptical about that.
Well, and the weird thing about that is actually a lot of that is coming from channelers and stuff, and like
Oh yeah.
so.
And then it's like and that brings us into this. I got news for ufologists, right? Not that I'm a very mediocre ufologist, whatever the ufologist is, but I have news for ufologists that are much more well read. I wish I could read more. I've brain issues. But anyways, I got news for ufologists. Why don't we talk enough about how the phenomenon engages in psyops? Like, aren't they engaging in psyops more than governments are? I mean, if we were to, I got to say this, and I got to say it clearly because I don't like how this is ignored. I think it's biased, and I think it's ridiculous. Take two scales, right? On one scale is how the U.S. government handles the UFO issue, and on the other scale is how the phenomenon handles the UFO issue. When it comes to a psyop, here's the phenomena, and here's the U.S. government. And I do believe that's true because okay, let me lay it out if you're still skeptical or you think I'm being ridiculous. School landings, abductions, telepathy, going through people's walls, being in our ocean, maybe even slide 9, controlling what people think. Can we really rule that out? And I'm sure, James, you could think of a lot more, and yet still no open contact. Still leaving us to our own imagination, choose our own adventure scenario. I don't think people think deeply enough about how much that is a psyop. That is a psyop on steroids. And the government's just like, how do we even deal with this? Yes. Do I think the government is wrong in how they deal with it? Yes. But it's like they've also been given a pretty crappy situation themselves.
I have to agree with that. And again, I mean, if they've shaped our beliefs for thousands of years, say Fatima as an example, right? And kind of religiously influence us socially, culturally, in different ways, that's without revealing themselves. I mean, we don't know the intent behind that, right? And I know, some of the last interviews I did was with Reed Summers, and the I don't have any issues with what he's saying in regards to like we why why don't we have a say in how engagement goes on, right? Collectively as humans, right? That I don't see a problem with that. Like I think there are some people who are too willing to give the UFO phenomenon. I mean, okay, we talk about this is going to be a fun one for you, Ryan. People within the cover up, right? They're against amnesty for people who have insinuated the cover up, right? But what about amnesty to the phenomenon? Are they forgiven for everything as well? I I mean, I think that's a deeper question, and we're nowhere. I mean, we can't even have that conversation yet because we don't have an open engagement. But I think that like a human centric thing where we set up something where like why shouldn't we have a say? It's like we're at the whim of the phenomenon more or less. Even if you're doing CE5 and getting some kind of participation, you're not really being given answers. And even if you are, how much can you really take at face value?
Yeah. I mean, I we would need someone much smarter than me to explain in a psychological way why so many people in the UFO community are so eager to assume that how the UFO intelligences engage our world is not morally questionable at the very minimum, and on the other side of the spectrum, very morally problematic. And I do it myself, right? When it comes to my alien AI hypothesis, I tend to, and this maybe is just optimism bias, but I tend to think that there's something that they're doing with us that will lead to a better outcome. But even then, they're still doing very morally questionable stuff, like with, in particular, abductions. So even if they are leading us to a higher potential, that doesn't erase that abductions by any objective standard are unethical. Maybe to them they're not, but to us they are, and our take, it has to be just as valid as their take. So it is weird to me how, it is weird to me how we put all this attention on governments being the boogeyman, but then the phenomenon has been here for so long and may have even influenced our religions, shaped our destiny, engages with us intimately, but then refuses to tell us who they are and what they're all about. And I'm going to cite Dr. Eric Davis says this a lot, and I always appreciate when he says this. He says, I remember him saying this from some interview. He said, unfortunately, this is what he said. He said, unfortunately, the phenomenon does not tell us where they're from and what they're doing here. So we need philosophers to interpret what they're doing. And it's like, imagine if I were to break into your home and just like spray paint your
Yeah.
bedboard every once in a while and, take a razor blade and cut your finger a little bit. So you'd wake up and be like, what the hell is this? And this is my way of like interacting with you. And then you're going to look at me and be like, man, this guy is so spiritually evolved. That's crazy.
Yeah, and I think Jim Semivan always says they don't let you take them to meet the parents or something. And well, and again, I've had, like 99% positive experiences with the phenomenon. And, I don't think at least that the intelligences that I interacted with have like a malice intent. But at the same time, where's our say in it? And
You know what I think it comes down to? I think it comes down to something that's less black and white and more moral versus immoral. It's more about our interests butting up against their interests. Um, and that doesn't mean we let them off the hook, and it doesn't mean that it's not ethically problematic. It just means that what they're doing is not so much that they're trying to be evil or malicious. It's just that they have interests as a civilization that we don't like. I mean, I think a lot of abductees would be like, I don't want to be abducted. But the phenomenon or the species that's doing it's like, you don't want to be abducted, but we put our interests above yours. And I think that is a lot of the dynamic that has been unfolding over 80 years.
yeah, and I mean, that's the thing again with disclosure is that without any kind of disclosures, we can't even begin to have those conversations about what our interest is. I mean, we can't even set the stage to say what is our human interest in regards to the phenomenon. All right, we're not even there yet. That's what's so crazy. We're I don't want to say we're nowhere, but we're basically at zero right now until disclosure happens and we can start to develop a map of our reality and our relationship with the phenomenon.
Yeah, I think you just laid out why disclosure is so important. And I don't think I've thought of it this clearly before, but I think that's exactly right. I mean, if you look at the ufological landscape right now, it's not very practical. It's more like spiritual and philosophical and meta, but it's not really practical. We're not asking like, what should we do once open contact happens? How should we perceive what they're doing? Should we trust them? Like these very, and maybe I'm wrong, but from what I've seen, which is limited, these very practical questions are ignored. And I think a lot of people within ufology don't realize that's occurring. And I think it's very simple why that's occurring. It's because we haven't had disclosure yet, right? The topic, no matter how much you believe in it, there's a big difference between believing something is here and consensus reality knowing it's here. And until consensus reality knows it's here, we're not going to move into those important questions. Those important questions are not going to come to the surface, and our exploration of ufology will be just entirely too theoretical until that day comes, I think.
Yeah, and that's why disclosure is so important because we need to start somewhere, and we're just like we're more or less running in circles, ideologically and in a practical sense, you know, we're in like quicksand. So, until and this the kind of disclosure, because okay, let's just say that since 2017, the level of psyop has advanced, and we're in a psyop right now. Uh, uh, it's a if it is a psychological operation and it's gearing towards some kind of transparency, that's still going to get us further than nothing at all. So it's difficult because at this point we still do have more transparency than 10 years ago, right? With more insiders coming forward, talking about different aspects of the phenomenon. But, you know, until we have the actual disclosure, whatever that disclosure event, whoever and however it happens, we haven't even started yet.
And I want to point out a contradiction. At least I perceive it as a contradiction. Some ufologists seem to be very like skittish about UFO disclosure because they say it's going to be a soft disclosure or an incomplete disclosure. Meanwhile, they also seem to say that they want to be the ones that advances the topic. So I'm thinking to myself, okay, if you want more of a role, then wouldn't you want the US government to give more of a limited disclosure so that your voice on some of the other topics would be more amplified? So to me, that's a little bit of a contradiction as I see it. But that's just a side point.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure what even is going to happen from here. I don't think anybody knows for sure. I'm generally speaking, I'm optimistic as an individual, and no matter what happens, we're going to have to make the best of it, right? That's generally my attitude. Whatever we have to work with is that's all we have, right? So in a practical way, we're going to have to deal the hand that we've been given, right? And I don't know to what extent in as an individual or even a small group of individuals we can alter that path. Um, I mean, other than like again, the age of disclosure. Uh, let me put it like this. Ryan, do you think we are in the age of disclosure?
Yeah, I do. I do. And I'll tell you why I think that. I think we're in the age of disclosure because I mean, just from a very logistical standpoint, there was legislation passed that allowed whistleblowers to contact and communicate to inspector generals and intelligence and congressional committees, right? That was before that legislation, they could not do that. That was, as far as I understand, they would have been prosecuted if they did that. And then that kind of like led to, I mean, and then you just look at like the New York Times article and everything that followed from that. And they even said it in the Age of Disclosure documentary that once the whistleblowers started coming forward, that's what triggered congressional interests. It was the whistleblowers or the witnesses, right? David Fravor, Ryan Graves, and people we've never heard about. Like, they didn't just, like, it's not like Congress woke up one morning and says, time for a UFO hearing. Let's just see what it's all about. No, it was the New York Times article. It was David Fravor coming forward, learning about the USS Nimitz UFO event series. It was the legislation getting passed, and it was the whistleblowers coming forward to congressional committees. So like that itself demonstrates how important disclosure is, right? Why has the conversation advanced? It's because the landscape has advanced. Now, what would be the ultimate shift in landscape? Disclosure would be the ultimate shift in landscape because it would stop there being a debate. And yes, I think that after disclosure, so many people would start talking about the UFO issue that never would before. So, you know, are they all going to be in on the PSYOP? Like, are all the people that were in the military and the intelligence community, are they all going to be in the PSYOP? Are they all going to tell us their narrative? Or, I mean, they're human beings just like us. Like, I would like to believe that some of them are just going to be like, yeah, I knew about it. I was a part of it. And here's what you should know. Like, obviously not breaking anything that they signed an NDA with, but like, you know, this whole idea of like this whole idea that a psyop can like maintain its perfect form. I think it's just a mythology. If anything was to like threaten a psyop more than anything else, it would be disclosure, because we've already seen this happen even before disclosure with like James Clapper. You think James Clapper is going to start talking about UFOs if what has preceded him recently did not precede him? He would not talk about it. He'd have no incentive to. Do you think Marco Rubio would be talking about UFOs if without the New York Times article and all the whistleblowers he's had conversations with? No, he wouldn't. There'd be absolutely no incentive to. So to me, ironically or even paradoxically, disclosure is the ultimate psyop killer because it incentivizes people within the intelligence community, within the military, within the government, whether they're still employed or they were employed in the past, to start talking about it. They're just going to tell us stuff they experience. Yeah, some people might be like big company people and will really want to steer the narrative, but that doesn't mean everyone is going to. So to me, the ultimate psyop killer, paradoxically, is disclosure, regardless of where it comes from.
Well, and this gets into something that I wanted to talk about too, is the catastrophic disclosure versus the controlled disclosure. And that, again, catastrophic disclosure has been stated, if we're going to go by Carl Nell's definitions, it's basically an uncontrolled disclosure. It means it's unpredictable, it's without management or oversight, so it's a free for all. A foreign adversarial country could disclose, and they can control the narrative then, right? Or disclosure happens by the phenomenon and is panicking, right? Like that would be a catastrophic disclosure. I mean, I think other more nuanced elements of that conversation would be that part of the catastrophic disclosure, it would be seen by, let's say, the US government as catastrophic disclosure would be the disclosures of people that have been murdered, right? To maintain the secrecy, crimes against humanity, withholding certain technologies that would benefit humanity, and other kind of things that they would rather keep hidden, And this is I guess, a difficult conversation because, of course, if they did the disclose, if there was a disclosure, they're not going to want to focus in on those, you know, those type of parts of the argument versus like the controlled disclosure would be what they would see as the most
They
manageable.
won't want to focus on it, but there's a pretty decent chance people inside the national security apparatus after disclosure will come forward and be like, yes, murders have happened.
Well, and what's interesting is that
So they can
David Grush is,
they can only control the narrative from the people that they enlist to talk, but they cannot control the narrative from everyone else in the intelligence community and government that are going to talk outside of their purview. Go ahead, David Grush, you were bringing it up.
well, and I mean, David Grush even put that on the table as, people have been murdered to maintain the secrecy, potentially. So that, him actually mentioning that is a big part of the deal. But the control disclosure, the idea, and I think Richard Dolan too has said this, to think that you can, to be so arrogant to think that you can actually control disclosure once it happens is absurd. Like
I mean, the first thing you have to do is assume that the phenomenon is going to cooperate with controlled disclosure,
correct. Yeah.
which is a big open question.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of unknowns with disclosure, and that's the hold up, so to speak. Because again, once there is a disclosure, and like you said, that there's 8 million people now engaging with the phenomenon in one way or another, whether it be the idea of non-human intelligence interacting with us or whatever it is. Yeah, I don't know what level of secrecy can be maintained other than specifics of things that have occurred.
Yeah. And I know one of the counters to that argument is people will say, well, before the Enlightenment, everyone were shamans and everyone had spiritual beliefs, but it is plausible. I think, I don't know how likely it's plausible, but that there's a different resonance when you know it's real scientifically versus it's more like a spiritual orientation. Even Carl Nell pointed this out in one of the conferences he did. He said, I'm a Christian, but there's a big difference between believing there's angels and there's spiritual entities and there's this and there's that, and knowing there's a huge difference. So there might be a different resonance when you know. So I would argue that the aperture can be opened up wider just by knowing epistemologically versus not knowing epistemologically, knowing by faith or by belief. And number two, I wanted to talk about the Men in Black because I think the Men in Black are bizarre. I'm definitely not an expert on them, but I mean, this is the weird thing about disclosure. You start having to give weight to every idea. You can't say, "Oh, that's too far out there," because the foundation and base of disclosure that we can prove is already outlandish. So everything else is kind of on the table. And yes, people are going to start having to ask, are the Men in Black, some of them, are they non-human intelligences and part of the control structure, keeping disclosure from happening before they want it to happen? Yes, that is not an irresponsible question after disclosure. After disclosure, it is a very legitimate question, and it ties into my perspective that we are so quick to be angry at the US government, and we give the phenomenon a complete pass regarding the degree of disinformation and counterintelligence they engage in. And then another can of worms that's going to be open after disclosure is how much open contact does the legacy program or the National Security Agency or facets of the government or various governments have. In the age of disclosure, it might have been, I think it was Dr. Eric Davis. He talked about, someone talked about the Holloman Air Force Base
Yeah, it was
1964 event.
Yeah.
3 UAP approached the Air Force Base. One of them landed on the tarmac. All of this reportedly. And then NHI entity, maybe it was only one, I don't remember, but an alien, let's just call it an alien, boarded the craft and interacted with uniformed Air Force and civilian CIA personnel. And it was George Bush, I think yes. So this is what it was. If recollection serves me, Dr. Eric Davis said he had this conversation with George Bush too, and George Bush wanted to know more about it, and he was told, "You don't have a need to know." Okay, so if this actually did happen, a craft landed at Holloman Air Force Base, a humanoid alien came out of it and started having conversations with Air Force and Central Intelligence Agency personnel, then obviously, without being hyperbolic, there is open contact with some of these institutions. And that's also going to be part of the can of worms. It's like people are going to want to know, okay, so who's having open contact with who? Why are you having open contact? And do you have some kind of treaty or agreement? And if so, what is it? Like, that's on top of are some of the men in black non-human intelligences. And I'm sure there's other layers of bizarreness that we're all going to have to come to terms with, or at least address as a possibility that I'm not even thinking about.
Yeah, those are a lot of inconvenient possibilities, right? And have there been non-human intelligences remote influencing or even among us diverting disclosure from within?
But you know what the most pathetic part is? The most pathetic part is maybe this is all normal and natural. Like maybe like what we're experiencing now is the anomaly. What we're experiencing now is the diversion. In other words, maybe all planets in the universe get to a point where you don't get to exist by yourself anymore. You have to start interacting with some of your neighbors. You have to start getting out of your comfort zone. You got to be insular for a long time. That was bizarre. That was the anomaly. That was the going off what's natural. And maybe that's the absurdity of disclosure. Disclosure is not an anomaly. Disclosure is not mysterious. Disclosure is humanity getting to a point where we become more like a Star Wars universe, if you will, for maybe an imperfect way of expressing that kind of transition. Maybe that's normal. Maybe that is like we look at disclosure, we look at open contact as something so bizarre or out of the ordinary, or something that is outside what is supposed to happen. But maybe these eons that humanity has lived in isolation, yeah, we've had some open contact, but I think it's been very limited, and it's been between individuals. Maybe that's what's weird. Maybe that's what's bizarre. Maybe a post-disclosure world is about humanity becoming more normal, like other planets who have been around longer than us, and just having conversations with NHI on a regular basis, and it just becomes normalized.
Right. And I mean, again, to these non-human intelligence, we're the non-human, so to speak, or whatever is different from them potentially. So what do you think is going to be the aftermath of the Age of Disclosure release? And the recent media we've had, David Grush came out, said he saw pictures of non-humans in his official capacity.
He did say we saw a picture. He did say he saw pictures of NHI when he said that he was actually given access to an official U.S. government UAP program. Maybe it was only partial access, but enough access to actually see a photograph of a non-human intelligence. I think some people missed that. And that would make him a first-hand witness. Everyone's like, oh, he's a second-hand witness. I'm sorry, if you've been officially read in to a United States UFO special access program, and you're reading through the briefing and you come across an image and it says, this is non-human intelligence, we have two choices. Either the U.S. government is engaging in an elaborate psyop, or the U.S. government has recovered craft and non-human intelligence, and he is reading into that program's findings. So he is a first-hand witness. I'm going to triple down on that. Well, here's what I think. Because James Fox, I think it was on November 11th, was on the Redacted News podcast. And he said something really, really interesting. He said that there is an actual movement behind the Age of Disclosure documentary. It's not just a documentary. He said that there is a coalition, as I understood it, of witnesses, whistleblowers coming forward who are going to plead to President Donald Trump to release them of their NDAs so that they can testify to congressional committees. The implication might be they'll also talk publicly about it as well. Obviously, they're not going to breach their NDA, but it depends upon what the Trump administration does. But the very fact that they could just openly talk to at least congressional committees, because as a result of their plea to Trump being initiated, would be huge. So if what James Fox is saying is true, and James Fox, he even said that some of these people have worked with the craft, like literally worked with the craft, not just people reading into the programs. If any of that is true, then the Age of Disclosure is not just a documentary. There's a lot that has been planned behind the scenes to pressure the Trump administration, and it makes sense, right? And so I'm hopeful that the Age of Disclosure will lead to more people within U.S. government and the intelligence community coming forward and talking about this, because the stigma has dropped to some extent, and it's kind of like there is courage in numbers. You start seeing Jim Clapper and all these other people talking openly about it. You're like, I want to be part of this conversation. So more people I think will likely come forward, whether they're part of whether they're a part of the coalition James Fox spoke of or not. And so I'm optimistic. I always have a fear though. Like I always have a fear in my gut that we live in the twilight zone and just nothing ever is going to happen, no matter, like this is just going to keep going. We're going to get more hearings. Like we're going to get like a new hearing every year for the rest of my life of like better and better whistleblowers, right? Like literally the whistleblowers even get better, and documentaries that trump the Age of Disclosure, but we'll still be living in a pre-disclosure world, twilight zone. There's always that fear inside me, if I'm being honest.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear you. But I mean, before we started recording, we even mentioned like, remember like 10 years ago, whatever, it was like there'd be like a UFO conference and a lecture was released and it was like the most amazing thing. In like the early 2000s, or I mean, and I'm sure before that you had to go to the conferences to even see them. And that was like a big deal. If like when the Stevensville case happened, or when the Phoenix Light happened, it was like that was like the biggest thing to happen like ever. And now we've had so much happen in the last 8 years or so. And I know people are going to argue it's in part manufactured, right? But I still think that we're further along now in our engagement with the phenomenon and people just being aware of it and taking it seriously than we ever have before.
Yeah, like 10 years ago, if some no-named member of Congress just said anything about UFOs, the UFO community would find it so impressive. Like we are like light years progressed beyond where we were before the New York Times article. And I think a lot of it comes down to we've just become I can't think of the term, but it's like nothing affects us anymore. You know what I mean? Like the only thing that's really going to impress us at this point is disclosure. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. Like even if the president of the United States said, I think there's something to UFOs, and I'll get back to you on it at some point. I don't know if the UFO community would go crazy about that at this point.
Yeah.
I really don't know. They'd be like, I'll see it when I believe it. You know what I mean? Like because of how far we've gone. The only thing left to impress the UFO community is disclosure. And I liked how you brought up Stevensville and the Phoenix Lights. I like it because to me that demonstrates that the phenomenon wants disclosure at some point, right? Me, that's how I interpret it, because I don't think they need to do that. They don't need to pull a Phoenix Lights. They don't need to pull a Stevensville. They don't need to pull a Rua, Zimbabwe, or what happened in Australia, whatever the name of that school was. They don't need to West Hall. Thank you. They don't need to do that. Like there's no like obligation to do that. Like even if you want to argue that well, their cloaking system malfunctioned during the Phoenix lights. Okay, but you don't intentionally land at a schoolyard. That's not a malfunction of a cloaking system. That's like wanting to interact with humanity. And if you read the debrief article that came out in 2023, I think it was June 5th, the article that brought David Grush to our attention, I think it's the last sentence that was a quote from David Grush. And he said that one of the reasons we should really disclose is to prevent a situation where the phenomenon discloses first and it's incredibly disruptive. Because I think humanity would be much better at dealing with an a open contact event that comes out of nowhere if we already started knowing that it's here versus an open contact event that happens without any indication that it's going to happen. I mean, if you want, here's the thing, the idea that the government is so worried about how we'll respond, I'm going to call bullshit by just saying, if you were really so worried, you would just spill the beans because you don't know what the phenomenon is going to do. It could engage in open contact tomorrow, and that would be so catastrophic that it would make a disclosure event by the president, look minuscule in comparison.
Right. I mean, again, they would still have some measure of influence if they actually disclosed it. And some people are saying, oh, well, they've been working behind the scenes this whole time, or at least some people, negotiating deals with the legacy program as to what is going to come out and how it's going to come out. I just, I just hope that it does come out. And, again, there's so many ways that it can. The phenomenon could disclose at any time. I know the kind of argument against that is, well, there's no precedent for it. I mean, the 1952 Washington, D.C. event was kind of really in your face too. But
And some people would reference Fatima
Fatima,
incidents where
yeah,
Fatima, thank you, Fatima incidents that had a lot of people witness it. They would say that that was a kind of
thousands.
disclosure,
Yeah,
thousands.
yeah. So I think it would be better for everyone if humanity did the disclosure somehow. But then
Oh,
again, we're gonna always come to these paradoxes of, well, no disclosure could be trusted. No disclosure is perfect. I think that any form of disclosure is going to have some level of disruption because of it's going to be the inertia of the cover up.
yeah, and I want to bring something up from the film The Age of Disclosure, and it relates to the legacy program. Jay Stratton in the documentary, he said that when he was director of the UAP task force, it was the legacy program was pushing back against the UAP task force and trying to defund it, and maybe fund it. I'd have to review the clip, but that gets me wondering. I think people are kind of missing the plot a little bit when they get fixated on disinformation or psyops. And by the way, I just want to be clear. I'm not saying they shouldn't fixate on it. I think what's healthy within ufology is if people focus on different things. And I could be the one that's wrong. So I love people pushing back against how I see it. But getting back to my point is that how much power does the legacy program have? That really makes me kind of frightened because there might be some truth to, there are elements of the US government that are more transparent, but they're scared of the legacy program. You know what I mean? Like how much power do they have? It could be, there could be some truth that they have more power than the US government. It's not so much that there are the people in the DOD or the CIA are like so mischievous. It might just be like they feel like that it's too dangerous for them to push back against the secrecy.
Yeah, and there's people that are known publicly that have interacted with the legacy program, but I think people should probably be much more concerned about the people that we don't know that are deep within that are within and perpetuating the legacy program, right? Like the people that we don't know. I mean, they're I'm sure much less obligated, at least in their own view, to play by any rules.
Yeah, what is the name of that guy? They call him Darth Vader. He was like he played a huge role in the Iraq War. I forget his name.
Darth Vader.
Yeah, he
Um,
was like part of the Bush administration. He played a huge
Dick
role.
Cheney?
Dick Cheney. So there's a rumor. I think Grush did not say it like it was a fact, but I think Grush might have said that he heard rumors during his investigation for the UAP task force that Dick Cheney was like one of the major guys in that like kind of like had the most knowledge of the UFO issue on top of the like at the highest altitude of knowing like what the legacy program has discovered, what it all means. And like I just think that's hilarious because like he's always considered like this evil person. And like what if he was the person that was like had some of the most access? Like that's just like coming right from a Hollywood screenplay.
Right, and he's a contract. He had Booz Allen Hamilton too, so into the contract work. And I'll just say it because it's been written in books before that, I think it was, yeah, Bush Sr. also was listed as somebody, George Bush Sr., who was part of that group, right? The legacy group, as well as Henry Kissinger. So there's, these names here, and Grant Cameron one time got Dick Cheney on the phone and some call and thing. He has the clip released somewhere, and he asked him about the UFO subject, and didn't give him a direct like no, so
Hilarious.
good on Grant Cameron for that legendary UFO moment. I forget, it was in the early 2000s, yeah.
One of the most fascinating parts of the film, or one of the standout parts of the film, or noteworthy parts of the film, is that I think it was Lou Elizondo that said that the Vatican has proof, like epistemological, scientific proof that we're not alone. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, like I understand the U.S. government and other governments, but what is holding back the Vatican from sharing that information? And do they really want to look like the villains in a post-disclosure world? If there are any influential Catholics watching this interview, here's my communication to you. Like, if it turns out that they did have smoking gun evidence, like it's not going to make your institution look good. It's going to make them look just as bad as the national security apparatus. So what the hell are you waiting for?
I mean, I think they would have to know that, and somebody's got to, I mean, I don't know what elements are going to eventually come out. The U.S. government part, the Vatican part, but there's, of the religions, Christianity and actually Catholicism has been the most willing to go with the wave in some announcements they've made. Saying, oh, well, if there are aliens that, we would baptize them kind of thing. So, of the religions, I think Christianity has been the most adaptable so far.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I think in a post-disclosure world, we have a right to know why they chose not to disclose whatever alleged irrefutable data they had on the phenomenon. We should know why they would want to, like, what they're doing is no more problematic than if a government does it. So we have a right to know, why did you choose to go that route? I want an answer.
Well, I hope we get one. But do you have any final words on the Age of Disclosure documentary and or controlled disclosure?
My last word on controlled disclosure is that it can only be controlled if disclosure is meant to be controlled. That's a big assumption, right? Your intention to control something that may fundamentally be chaotic and purposely be chaotic is just naivety. If my perspective of possibility that disclosure is a natural evolution and our trajectory prior disclosure is what's the anomaly and what's weird, and what other civilizations in the universe would say, oh, that's strange. Really? They only talk to themselves? Then there is no controlled disclosure. There is a new phase of evolution that's chaotic and challenging. And the idea that you're going to control it in any fundamental way It's just humans being humans. And that's my last word.
All right. And that where can people follow your work, Ryan?
Yeah. On YouTube, Post Disclosure World, and on X, Post Disclosure. Thank you. And thanks for having me on, James. I really enjoyed this conversation.
For sure. And we'll talk again soon, man. Thanks for coming on.
Awesome.